I guess to start with, welcome. It's my honor to be here with Julie, Dr. Julie Albright today, who is a digital sociologist. And I suppose that for those of us who don't know, it might not be a bad idea for you to tell us just what a digital sociologist does.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. I was one of the early pioneers in looking at the social impacts of computing on society. In fact, so early when I went to my grad program to study for my PhD, I said, I want to study the impact of computing on society. They said, what does that have to do with sociology? And I thought, oh no. Now we know that, people spend more time online than on anything else now. So it's really reshaped society, reshaped relationships, reshaped communities and our social structures in ways that, people couldn't even have imagined a couple decades ago.
Well, you've written a book about it. I've written a book about it. You've written a book
Yeah.
called How Digital Natives Are Reshaping the American Dream, which I want to ask you about right away. And I've basically done kind of the same thing from a evolutionary world point of view, how technology has reshaped the brain. So let's start with you. How are digital natives reshaping the American dream? Is America getting better or worse, or will we know? What's in store
Maybe,
for us?
Maybe those are two separate questions.
Okay.
But, well, what I noticed was I had a front row seat as a professor at University of Southern California. Not only was I teaching there, but I also lived in residence for 7 years. And so I saw a lot of the changes going on in my students. And, I noticed rising rates of anxiety, rising rates of depression, loneliness. And I thought to myself, where's this coming from? And by the way, not only do I have a master's and PhD in sociology, I also have a master's and PhD in counseling. So
So you're
what I've
busy.
been doing is, yeah, I've been busy. I'm very overeducated, yes. And so what I've been doing is looking from a sociological standpoint at what the big trends are regarding this, digitization of society, and then putting on my counseling hat and saying, what are the impacts on the ground? How is this shaping behaviors and such? And it's shaping behaviors in ways that, like I said, are pretty surprising. In fact, it's reshaping the sort of pathway to adulthood. Young people aren't getting in relationships like they used to. For example, almost 70% of young people have not had a relationship in high school, like a boyfriend or girlfriend. If you go back to the golden age of the family, which, after post-World War II, for sociology, people married their high school sweetheart. That was a big thing. And now people don't even have a high school sweetheart. So,
Actually, they do. It's called the digital screen.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So they're not getting in
Yeah.
relationships. They're not getting married to anywhere close to the degree that their parents and grandparents did. They're not taking part in social organizations like churches, community groups, and things of that nature. They're unhooking political parties, any of those kinds of things. They're unhooking from, buying a house, getting married, having children. So these normal sort of pathway steps to adulthood, they're completely off that path. That's why I said reshaping the American dream. If you think about the American dream, it's kind of the white house, the picket fence,
Sure.
2.5 kids, a dog, and a car. And, a lot of these kids aren't even getting a driver's license, in fact. So, you've got Uber and you've got Lyft, or you got your parents to ferry you around now, a lot of them living at home. So it's completely reshaped what we would consider a normal pathway to adulthood.
So what's going to happen? What is this generation going to look like when they enter, or many of them have entered the workforce?
Yeah.
There, I'm aware of some studies a couple of months ago, maybe 3 months ago. There was a study in the Wall Street Journal where they interviewed HR managers from the top major American corporations, and 2/3 of them said they don't even give Gen Z an interview because
Wow.
by 3 months they're out because they have difficulties with communication, interpersonal skills,
Mhm.
adapting to rules and regulations. conclusions. On the other hand, there's all sorts of
Mhm.
articles and people, I guess sociologists, who are saying that, well, maybe they're getting some of it right. They're putting personal comfort first. They're looking to break traditional ties. They're fairly good at teamwork under some circumstances. They're taking a step back from the hurry and the pace of life. And don't worry, it's really not going to end up that bad. They're actually doing a needed reset politically. They're drifting towards certain conservative values, not radical values, and so on and so forth. I, as a neurologist, see the fact, and I see the studies, and I'm involved in the studies where I see their brains literally coming apart in terms
Yeah.
of deterioration of anatomical structures that are used to create higher thought, logic, as well as disintegration of major switchboard structures in the brain, all of which are directly related to the amount of time that they spend in front of a screen, especially when it comes to social media and video games. So I've got all of these conflicting things coming, but unfortunately, as a physician, my point of view is drastically pessimistic, because my job is also to assume the worst and have somebody prove it wrong. Is there hope for the future for this generation? And are they even going to be able to raise a family? Do they have any parenting skills that are necessary to raise children of their own? Do they even care?
Yeah,
What's happening with them?
these are good questions. And, one of the things I want to kind of go back to is, why do we care about this? Why does it matter that they're unhooking from these things or that they're doing it differently? And as you said, I'm sure there are some things that maybe they're getting right. Like maybe we are burning out on working, 9,000 hours a week. But on the other hand, if we go back to the earliest sociological studies, uh, they show that suicidality in sort of this mental health issue is directly related to how woven into the social fabric you are. They originally looked at religion, for example, Catholics versus Protestants, Catholics more woven in. And it's not just about having some belief in a God or being
Mhm.
religious per se, but there's that whole
It's belonging.
fellowship
Yeah.
aspect, support, social support aspect, knowing someone's there for you. And it serves a kind of anchoring function. And so, my point in framing it this way about coming untethered from all these long-standing social structures and ways of behaving in relationships is that you're also coming unmoored at the same time. These are the things that anchor you and that bolster self-esteem, that bolster mental and physical health,
Mhm.
both. And when you pull up from that, okay, let's say we're going to reshape the American dream. We're going to reshape these long-standing behaviors. That's fine. But the fact is we're sort of building our house on sand at this point. What's taken its place? The ephemerality of Instagram or
Right.
TikTok or social media. So we haven't reshaped, like we're going to do marriage contracts that are 7 years long and renewable. We're not doing that. What we're doing is completely pulling up and uprooting or unmooring from these tethering social structures, and nothing's really taking their place. That's the issue, as
Well,
I see it.
sure. I mean, we're not only doing that sociologically, but sociological behavior is brain behavior, and
Correct.
brain behavior is neurophysiology. It's dopamine. It's disintegration of synapses. It's changes in brainwave function in people who are on Chat GPT. It's memory destruction in people who are on Chat GPT. You're probably aware of the MIT Language Lab study, which is about a month or so old,
Yeah.
where they divided these students into three groups, and they had them write essays. One did it with Chat, the other one did it with Google, and the third did it by hand. And the first one did it fastest, but they couldn't remember anything that they wrote 3 minutes after they wrote it.
Yeah.
And not only that, but once they got out of the study 3 months later, they had a drop in their cognitive skills in thinking and writing that was left over from becoming used to artificial intelligence. 70% of students today use artificial intelligence in school to write their papers,
Yes.
to answer questions, and so on and so forth. So we're heading headlong into a wall of stupidity, for lack of a more professional word. I mean, we're crashing into it at full speed. You know it, I know it,
Yes.
but it's still happening because it's so addictive and because it can happen. So what's going to happen in your writings and in your speeches? I come across a word that you use frequently, and that's called sustainability. Uh, well, we don't want to sustain this, do we? What's going to happen? Do you see a way out? Do you see the pendulum swinging the other way, or is it going to need a crisis, a reset? Because the only thing that really changes human behavior the most, in my opinion, is suffering. It's crisis. It's evolution doesn't reward laziness. Evolution rewards
Right.
struggle, and it rewards winning a battle of some sort. It doesn't reward ant-like behavior and laziness. So what's going to happen?
Gosh, those are great questions. So many thoughts come to mind as you say that. One of the things, this is just an anecdote, but it reminded me when you were speaking, as I went on a world tour with my book, multiple times I had people like occupational therapists, speech therapists run up to me afterwards and say, we're seeing speech delays in our kids. Because not only are the kids, young people, teens, etc., and young adults using an inordinate amount of time on devices, but their parents are too. As you said, the addictive nature of it, drawing it in, staring at a screen, they're also handing screens to babies as sort of a pacifier, digital pacifier. And so instead of looking and seeing, let's say, the mother's face and speaking directly
Sure,
to the
sure,
child, it's all mediated. They're looking at a screen, and it's actually resulting in things like speech delays,
sure.
which is what they're telling me. Back to your
Yep.
idea of the brain thing, and I think that you're bringing up an interesting issue, which I also think plays into relationships, which is this idea of friction. We're entering this time now where, and I would think about it like you talked about offloading this cognitive load or cognitive work to ChatGPT, for example, and then the brains aren't working as strongly to remember, for example, what was written. And, you might think of it for people that haven't used ChatGPT or similar AIs, might think of it like weightlifting. If you go to the gym, you're lifting weights, you're getting stronger. But if you have your robot do it for you,
Sure. Well,
they're lifting the weight, you're not building up that muscle. And it's the same
no.
thing cognitively. It's the same thing socially. And
and
so
and
we're sort of
physiologically.
missing out on that.
Yeah, we have a phrase in neurology: "Use it or lose it," which
That's
is
it.
not,
It's use it or lose it.
which is not
Correct.
just or fire together to wire together, which is the physiologic equivalent. But you mentioned you have therapists and people like that coming up to you after the meetings,
Yes.
after your lectures. In my lectures, I've changed the thrust of the argument. I have parents running away from me because I lay out all the stuff we've been talking about, and then I give this pregnant pause and I say, well, who gave them the technology? You did.
Yeah.
And I think that's in my opinion, I think it's the parents that need to be spoken to much more, especially the parents of children who aren't 16 yet. 17, 18 is maybe a little too old, and they need to get it right because there are
Mm.
still tons of people, probably the majority of people, at the very best, they say, well, I have to give it to my children. Everybody else has it. They'll be left out of the cold. They'll be cut out of class. They won't have
Yeah.
friends. They won't have peers. And I turn to them and I say, wait a minute, who's the parent here? You know, uh, parents in this day and age somehow or another believe that their children have rights. And I have a famous line which I say, and I tell them, your children don't have any rights to anything whatsoever, except the stuff that you're supposed to give them. They have a right to love, they have to be loved, to be educated. They have a right to have a roof over their home. They don't have a right to a new iPhone that's an addictive device, which is going to put them on the path to intellectual stupidity and possibly even suicide, never mind a 700-fold increase in accidents, fatal and non-fatal, in children who have smartphones versus those who don't. But the parents continue to insist that they're going to give their children digital heroin and that that's going to make them better parents, or at worst, it'll at least keep the kids, quote, satisfied. Isn't that the ultimate social paradox, that we've fallen
Yes.
into the trap of true digital neurological, sociological addiction, and we're actually destroying ourselves as a human race to get, end
Well,
stage here?
well, it's a great point, and I found something really interesting that I wrote about in my book regarding this, and I think it's very telling. I like to read the tea leaves. I like to see signs and patterns. I say I see the constellations in the stars, and one of the things that I noted was, to your point about parents giving their kids devices, in Silicon Valley, the kids of the scions of the tech
They
moguls
never got
in
it.
the biggest companies,
They never got them.
they go to a place called the Waldorf
I
School,
know. It's in
private
my
school.
lecture. Yeah.
That's right. They don't have
No.
devices there. They're
No.
not using
Right.
screens.
Right.
And instead what they're doing things like art. They're
Right.
doing music.
Right.
They're doing movement,
I know.
reading, all these sorts of things, where, and that's part of the story here, I think, is that as we become so immersed, and as you said, it's addictive now, in these technologies, we're moving further and further away from the body. And that's part of the problem here. And that's what I encourage people to do, is reconnect with themselves, their bodies, physicality, with nature. These are the kinds of things that are lacking. And that's in part driving us crazy. As you said, the brain is an embodied thing, and it's part of, being with nature, being with others. And we're sort of hardwired to be social. A few people are the Ted Kaczynskis out in a cabin alone in the woods. We're hardwired to be together and to be social. And
Sure.
these screens are drawing us in and drawing us away from that. So, I think, and the other thing to be said is, we came racing out of the box with these iPhones, and how exciting it was to have the internet in your hand or in your pocket at all times. And that's another part of the story. It goes with us now into the classrooms, into bed at night. Young people are sleeping with their phones, waking up and texting in the middle of the night. And, so this idea that it's with us at all times. So we have to, I think, now that we're sort of running out of the box like a horse race at high speed into the internet era, into the social media era, and now into the AI era, I think we have to step back now and try to create a more mindful use of technology amongst parents and kids, families, setting aside some sacred spaces where maybe we don't have phones. Like maybe we're going for a walk as a family without our devices. Maybe we're not going to have devices at the dinner table, for example. Things of that. We have to carve out spaces. We're not going to have no technology, but we have to be mindful about how we're using it, when we're using it. And again, for kids, they're starting to say not to give them the phone in their bassinet or in their crib, for example.
In the history of human neurologic behavior, being mindful has never appeared unless there was a clear-cut reward that was greater than the current status quo. And you and I talking about it is simply, in my opinion, not reward enough for a reset of any perhaps major making. I think, as you say, there may be some points of light where schools are banning cell phones, where
Yeah.
certain organizations are looking at AI, like the EU, and they're trying to draft guidelines and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, um, and I'm sure you've mentioned this, and I've mentioned it in my book, the technology simply outpaces the politics. It outpaces uh,
Yes.
everything, because everything is now virtual. Can little individual points of light even make a difference when you've got 95% of the world's population get 100% of their information from two sources today, Meta and Google?
Yeah.
It's no longer going to the bookstore, browsing around for an hour, getting a cup of coffee, and looking for a new book that you don't know about that you might read. Do Is
Well,
there a
it
chance? Is
sounds
there a chance that there's going to be, a reset before everything crashes into the wall?
well, I will tell you, I do see some points of light, at least here in Los Angeles.
Oh,
So some of the students are actually coming to administrators saying, "Hey, can we have, for example, our dean of religious life, Dean Sony,
hmm.
one of the kids came to him and said, 'Hey, can we have a device-free phone in the new dining hall, a device-free table?'" I mean, and he said, "What do you mean?" And the kid says, "Have you been in the dining hall?" And he goes, "No, not yet." And he goes, "If you walk in there, every table, every kid's sitting alone and is looking at a device. I want to have a device-free table where we can interact and talk with one another." And the dean was just kind of shocked to hear this. So another kid came up and said, "Hey, I want to create some kind of a device-free social group. Like maybe we're going to sit around a campfire and talk and hang out." And there's another group that's trying to. It's called Bricks, and it's the idea that let's go on a hike together and not have our phones for 2 hours or something. So I see some groundswell amongst young people. They know something's wrong. It's almost like our modern problem with no name, but
Right.
they don't quite know what it is, and maybe they're not quite making the connection. But some kids are, and some kids are pushing ground up, not from
All right.
administration down, which I think is hopeful.
Well, but it's hopeful. But on the other hand, I'm going to be devil's advocate all day long here. On the other hand, it's pathetic because of what the administration isn't doing. Where on earth are the adults
Yeah,
in
where are
all
the
of this?
adults in the room?
Why isn't your
I
dean
know.
reading the UNESCO report that says that all schools should drift away, if not ban, and I'm quoting, computer learning entirely, and go back to teaching a teacher pupil interaction and learning
Yeah.
from books and paper and pencil? Sweden's
Yeah.
Karolinska Institute has given a recommendation that computers be limited, if not banned, in all schools, in all levels of education. They got it right.
It's
Why?
like the Waldorf school program.
Yeah,
Yeah.
why aren't the adults getting this right?
Where are the
And why
adults?
are
I know.
why are the screen battered university students and children coming to mom and pop and saying, "Can't we have a media free table?" What's the problem here? Why did the adults get into this so quickly, and why don't they wake up and see the fact that their children are not only getting poisoned, but that they can stop it like that? What's
Yeah.
the problem?
Well, I think that we have always had the myth of progress, right? The idea that progress is good, that more technology is progress, thus good. And we've lived by that for a very long time. And as if that's the case, oh, computers, this must be the great new tool that's going to elevate our thinking. It's going to make us more productive. It's going to make us do all these wonderful things, all the knowledge in the world at our fingertips. It sounds pretty great. But again, at this point in time, you and I both know that, and originally, by the way, people used to talk about computers being addictive. And I sort of laughed at it like, what's the difference between looking at your computer and looking at a television screen, for example? Because let's take it back to the early days of like AOL, America Online. People would go online, here, you've got mail, and get
Yes.
their mail or get a little chat. But it was plugged into the wall. And when you were done with that, you walked away and you went out into the world and you had lunch with someone and looked at them eye to eye and had a conversation, and you went and did the rest of the things in your
Sure.
life.
Sure.
But since that internet is now in our mobile devices, untethered from the wall and with us at all times, it gets harder and harder to pull away. But I think this idea of the myth of progress is part of the story. And for some schools, by the way, they're talking about having AI classrooms and the kids just jack into the matrix and they're going to learn that way. But I also think they're missing something, because part of the value, and a big part of the value, and if you go back to some of the early Harvard studies that looked over time what equated with success, it wasn't that they had more knowledge or that they got better grades or better test scores. It was that they had this sort of emotional intelligence. They were better at understanding their own emotions, others' emotions, reading people. These are the kinds of qualities that lifted people up in the corporate hierarchy, for example. And these are the qualities you get through those face-to-face interactions in the classroom, through networking, through building your network. And if everyone is staring at a device at the lunch tables, in the classrooms, this isn't happening. So I think that people that are thinking we're going to have this AI classroom are missing a key component of what education is all about, which to me is building those skills that's a foundation for later life in the working world.
Well, you hit it on the head. That study, or those studies from Harvard, actually came down to the fact that the single factor that determines overall success the best is the number of true social face-to-face relationships that you have.
That's it.
In one of my lectures, my last two slides are, the first is a group of children in northern India sitting in a primitive classroom with no computer, and they're all smiles ear to ear. And the second one is a group of miserable school children sitting in a classroom in the U.S. hooked up to their digital devices. And I asked the question, who do you think is happier, this group or that group? And you said it so well. I wrote this down. Maybe we should start to focus on attacking the word, or redefining the word progress. Maybe that's the key to hopefully maybe slowing this down and making that philosophical reset that I think we're both talking about happen. If we have people focus on, what does progress mean to you? Does it mean that you're happy, or does it mean that you're busy and that all of your free time is being taken up more and more by compulsive activities? Maybe just that simple thing, and how do you get happy? You take a step back and you meet with friends.
Yes.
Somebody
And
asked,
and that's that's the key too, is to happiness, and to people that were one click away from depression, depressed or not. The difference is having at least one friend,
right?
Only one friend, in fact. And a third of millennials have no friends. People are just jacked into the matrix 24 hours a day, and they're not taking that time to build those relationships. It takes time, it takes effort, and frankly, it's very easy to go in. And I think I started to say earlier, the nature of our digital interactions have changed. From the early days, again, plugged into the wall, you checked your mail, you got in a chat room or something, and then you walked away. But now we've got apps like Instagram, TikTok that are designed to be addictive. They are designed on that notion of random reinforcement, where sometimes you see content that's exciting or new, like wow, and then sometimes you flip through stuff and go, meh, not too much, and then bam, again, it's that dopamine hit, and it's we know that that's the most addictive feature. It's the same kind of qualities that you have baked into slot machines. Exact same.
I know.
Now, that wasn't how the early internet was made. And at the time, I sort of scoffed at the idea of it being addictive because of that. It's more like a television screen. You look at something, then you walk away. Well, now you don't walk away. And in fact, they've baked in or designed into these things, behavioral triggers that keep you coming back for more. And that's the difference now. And it's hard to break away.
Not
We
only,
know slot
yeah,
machines are addictive, but people don't talk about it as much with social media. But in the fact, it's designed the exact same way.
not only that, but in your neck of the woods in Silicon Valley, my colleagues, who I'm ashamed of, actually measure dopamine levels in programs that are being designed, and those
There it
that
is.
generate more dopamine through spectroscopy and other measurements are the ones that go on market. And
There it is.
And in 17 years, again, you said the whole thing, that nature of digital technology has changed. Yes, with the emergence of the iPhone, that screen phone, everything has just gone way down. And I also have another moment in my lectures where I talk about exactly what you said, and the audience is kind of sort of looking at me, and I say, you're all addicted to it. Is there anybody in the room who doesn't have a cell phone? And there isn't a single hand that goes up. And then I say, well, I'm a wine grower, which I am, and I think my wine is fairly well drinkable. I say, I'm going to show you just how addicted you are. If there's any one of you, and there may be 200, 300 people there, who's willing to leave your iPhone with me on the table after this lecture and come back in a week, I will give you a case of wine.
Yeah.
I must have lectured to several thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. I've given away 4 cases of wine.
Oh, God.
And
that says it all.
And that's like the tea leaf that you were talking about, and I said,
says it all.
And is there any one of you who wakes up in the morning, you get on the tram or on the bus or in your car, you pull out of the driveway, and you realize you don't have your cell phone with you? Is there any one of you who will stay in the car or keep walking? No. Every single one of you will go back home and pick up that mechanical device and put it into your pocket. How is it possible that in 17 years, humanity has become neurologically addicted to a mechanical fifth limb as opposed to 400,000 years of human evolution? So everybody's kind of looking around at themselves.
It's designed in. And also, like you said, my mentor likes to say, hey, you want to have a bad day, forget your cell phone at home and get to work and say, oh, no. It's so true. But it is difficult, and especially, too, because your phone now isn't just a phone. And by the way, when the early phones came out, most people used them for calling. Now most of them use it for texting of some sort or using an app. And there's something called task creep. So let's say you hear a ding and, you get a message, that's that dopamine hit, like Pavlov dog. Yeah. Suddenly you want to look at, and everyone grabs their phone and looks, is that mine? I hope it's mine. And then you're looking at email. Then, let's check Facebook or Instagram real quick, or let's go on here. And so, suddenly you're back sucked in there looking at all these things. So it's very easy to do. And I think, again, the fact that it goes with you, it's in your hand, it's in your pocket at all times, can go in your bed with you. It's very different than sitting at a desk for a couple of hours and walking away and doing other things. We just don't do it now, coupled with the fact that it's baked in, as you said, by experts in behavioral, manipulation, if you will. It's baked in now to these apps.
My solution is
coming back for more.
My solution is to ban cell phones. It's completely goofy, and it'll never happen. But on the other hand,
it's happening in some of the schools. It is happening in some of the schools.
On the other hand,
other schools are leaning in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's what some of the research shows too, that the higher income kids, the less likely the less time that they'll spend on a device or on devices and screens, including television. The lower income kids are spending more time on devices. So it's like a digital opioid. The opioid of the people now is digital screens.
And whenever I say that sentence, people think that I'm absolutely crazy.
They scoff. That you're being overly dramatic.
That I'm being overly dramatic. on the other hand, the brain does react more to overly dramatic news. And on the other hand, everything that made our life comfortable was invented before the digital age, whether it was a refrigerator, airplane, car, heater, washer, dryer, regular
Hot
telephone, and
water,
so on, hot water, and so on and so forth. So,
hot and cold running water.
so I don't know. I can't close on an optimistic note. I'm still, I'm hopefully optimistic, but I can't as a scientist, see it happening.
See a path out.
I'm
Yeah.
a firm believer of the so-called cohort effect, which I know you know about, where it's not just the kids and the people who are using the devices, but it's the people around them. Because when that person is glued into the cell phone and the other person next to them isn't, and they want to talk to them, that affects the person next to them indirectly. And then, of course, there's the great Fermi paradox, which basically, I'm sure you know it, but for those of our viewers and listeners who don't, basically says that at some point all growing civilizations begin to transfer more and more of their intellectual and reproductive power to technology, which is what's happening now. We can also reproduce artificially. And when that continues, it reaches a dangerous point where the diversity disappears and somebody or something metaphorically pulls the plug, and collapse ensues, and we come back down to a reset of where we were many, many years ago, which may not be out of the picture. So, because unless I think we could probably agree that unless those bright points of light become a little bit more linked, and we haven't talked about a whole bunch of other stuff like AI and the energy needs of AI and the global destruction that it's causing in terms of gobbling up electricity and water resources and blah blah blah. It's a hot mess. So what can people, we're supposed to end on good upbeat notes. So can we? Other than issuing progress or lack of progress reports, can we?
Well, we've got, the first step in change is awareness, I think. You have to be aware of the problem, define the problem. And I think, as you mentioned before, a lot of parents don't realize it's a problem or don't realize the unintended consequences. And all technologies have unintended consequences. You think of a car, before they had seat belts, people were crashing and getting killed, So we kind of need the seatbelt moment here where we try to think of what those guardrails might be. We have a film coming out later this summer called The Cost of Convenience, which was inspired by my book, Left to Their Own Devices. And what I'm hoping and what we're hoping is that we can start these conversations with parents on campuses and things like that, that we can begin to create that awareness where we say, hey, we need to reconnect again with ourselves, with our bodies, with nature and the sublime. These are the kinds of things that bolster our mental health, our physical health, lead to success, as we said, these relationships that we have and such. And, we need to sort of get back to basics on that level and really not throw devices out the window. We don't need to be Amish here, but the idea that, maybe we need to sort of rebalance our life, our physical embodied life with our digital life and our devices.
Well, let's hope we're successful at it. I think we're both working at it very hard. I know you are, and I'm trying to provide or synthesize the anatomical facts behind it. But I do agree with you. It's probably going to have to come from the bottom up, because from the top down, it doesn't seem to be working too much. Also, if for no other reason, then the digital age has made conventional politics obsolete, because there's no dialogue anymore, and politics are done based on virality and on shock value. They're not done on discourse or dialogue. They're done on that analogy of President Trump in the bathroom coming up with an idea and it becoming national policy. So when you try and run societies from the top down with those types of logistical new norms, um, uh, it makes things very difficult, which is one of the reasons that year by year the number of countries in democracies is decreasing, because people can um, uh, give preference to creature comforts over personal freedoms as long as they continue to get the former or think that they get the former. The country that provided the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people in the history of the planet is communist China. So,
and that's a whole other conversation.
And that's a whole other conversation. Yeah. So, so we've got work to do.
We sure do.
Anyway, I think I'm out of questions from my end, and I certainly appreciate being able to talk to you. And I'm really looking forward to the Cost of Convenience coming out, and I certainly will publicize your book, How Digital Natives Are Reshaping the American Dream, through this talk and otherwise, and cite it as a reference. And I'll be very honored if you have a moment to perhaps pick one or two points from our conversation, maybe even our book, and maybe our paths will cross soon at some international event. I'm not sure if you've been or are going to. There's an event in Budapest coming up in 2 weeks. The Brain something or another Congress, or it's basically designed about technology and the kind of stuff that we're talking about. But if you ever do come to Europe, Prague is always open.
Yes, I will. I do come. I was just there a few weeks ago. I come every year and all the time. So I'm happy to stop by at some point. So great to meet you. Thank you so much for having me. Look forward to speaking again. Take care now.